we are totally underestimating the damage that the current system is doing to kids, because like the median outcome of doing the traditional path is like being 35 years old with $100,000 of student debt,
right? And
being feeling totally stuck in life. Like that's actually the highest probability outcome.
Yeah.
And so if you could say, hey, you could do an apprenticeship, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade at primer, and then you can get, someone to mentor you for the next 2 years and go to trade school, whatever it is, like, and you can be making, $150,000 a year by 27 in a small town and be like a small business owner that's making an impact on all your customers' lives and a staple of the community. Like those are way better odds.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the pod, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is Primer? We're in the Primer office. What is Primer?
So Primer, we help top 1% teachers launch microschools in their communities. So we have built a tech stack that handles, we call it an operating system. So it handles everything from the state regulatory, stuff with Department of Education, local fire, health, safety, all that stuff, everything you need to get your school started. And then it also includes everything that you need to run a school. So a microschool leader can go from teaching at a current school where they maybe feel suffocated by the bureaucracy and the administrative bloat to serving their community in like 6 to 8 weeks and launching a school of their own that, in a community they know well. Ideally, they've lived there for a long time. They can launch their own school and kind of be entrepreneurs.
That's pretty cool. So you said helps top 1% teachers launch microschools, not parents. I'm curious why you're focused on the teacher.
Yeah, so we actually do have some parents that want to have asked to launch schools. Right now, we've only done it with teachers. So every state has different requirements for how they define what a registered private school is and who that school needs to be led by. And so some states require an active teaching certification. Some states require just a bachelor's degree. So for simplicity, all of our microschoolers now are former teachers. But there's no reason why in some states it couldn't be a parent at some point in the future.
That makes sense.
What's the difference between like a microschool in this system and a homeschool co-op or another group of homeschool folks getting together and teaching?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in like a homeschool pod, which maybe we can get into a little bit. But so our microschools are meant to be like a 1-for-1 replacement for a traditional school. So our students are coming here, families are choosing Primer coming from, sometimes from homeschools, but oftentimes from other public and private schools, charter schools. And so it's a, 8 to, depending on the school, it's 8 to 3:30 every day. There's aftercare. It meets at a physical location. Kids come there every single day. And so it really is meant to be kind of a 1-for-1 plug and play replacement for the traditional school system. Versus a homeschooling pod's usually like a more of a hybrid model. Parents are more involved. And so it's a different setup.
Is there like a religious component to it, or is it just purely anyone can start it, any teacher can do it? How is it positioned?
There's no religious component right now.
The reason I ask is because homeschooling traditionally comes from more religious background.
Yeah, so there's no religious component right now. One of the things we want to allow in the future is, so right now there's sort of like one way to start a primer school. So you can think of it as like, there's just the Primer OS, the operating system basically says, hey, here's the school, like congratulations, go. And here's like curriculum, here's all the student assessments, here's how we track progress, here's how students set goals, here's what you do for math, for the LA, all that stuff. And what I would like to do in the future is I'd like to have sort of a menu of like sort of so you can imagine having a classical Christian school or a Jewish day school or all these different variants. You could have a STEM immersion school, you could have a Mandarin immersion school, you could have a farm school. And so you could have these variations that are all pre-scaffolded, pre-built, ready to go. But then a microschooler could say, hey, like I really want to start an agriculture-oriented school on a farm in rural Florida. And they could go do that, and they could do it with Primer, and they could use, maybe 70% of the experience would be exactly the same, and then 30% of it would be tailored to that. And so you could imagine these different variations, whether it's pedagogy, whether it's religion, whether it's language immersion, whatever it might be. And so that's what we want to get to eventually, but right now it's all just basically the exact same setup.
Got it. So question I like to ask founders is, what is the world without you, what you're building? In the sense, like I'm a top 1% teacher, but Primer doesn't exist. What am I doing? Where am I stuck? What are problems I'm facing?
Yeah. So one of the craziest things is that probably 30% of the people that we've hired to lead microschools actually quit teaching. So they like were teaching and they got so frustrated by the traditional system. One of our microschool leaders told me this story where she said by her last year teaching, she taught a hybrid, like some special ed classes and some non-special ed classes. And she said she was spending on average 5 hours every Saturday doing paperwork. Was like a normal weekend for her. So like on top of being like very underpaid and working like very long hours and spending like personal capital to like, you know, buy school supplies and stuff for her like very underfunded school, she would then be like spending 5 hours a day on Saturdays, like doing this paperwork that was required by the state for these students that she, you know, knew was just like this massive like bureaucratic overreach blow. Right. And so she quit. She was like, I'm done. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. I think she experimented with being a real estate agent and a couple other things. And then she found Primer and she's like, this is my dream because I love teaching. I want to spend all day like helping kids. This is what I love doing. I love this community, but like, I don't want to deal with any of the paperwork. And when we told her like, hey, all you do is you fill out one thing at the beginning of the year and then we handle everything else for you. She said, that's my dream. Like, that's what I want to be doing. And that's so, cool. Yeah, I mean, there's very good research on the amount of teachers that are thinking about quitting their jobs or have quit their jobs. I think McKinsey did a study. There's like 30% of school teachers in the last 12 months considered quitting their job, a lot of which did. So I think there's, you know, the numbers speak for themselves on that front. And then the world without Primer on the student side of it. I mean, I think my view is that the current U.S. education system, like it is a existential problem for the future of the U.S. And we are, no one would openly articulate it this way, but we are effectively accepting, you know, the current status quo by not treating it like a fire-alarm fire and basically hoping it gets better over some period of like decades through policy changes or whatever. And I view it as like far more urgent than that and far more urgent than we're acting for. And so, yeah, I think Primer, I mean, a lot of the families that come to Primer like literally articulate it. It's like, hey, you changed my kid's life. Like everything about our life changed after we got Primer. And I think that's the reality for like millions and millions of families that are trapped in the traditional system.
That's awesome. So why do you say existential threat, problem to the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, just practically speaking, education is upstream of everything else. Right. So if you, you know, we can talk about how we want more, you know, more people working on ambitious projects, and we want more people being willing to take risk, and we want more, you know, whatever your articulation of like something that needs to change about the way that maybe young professionals that are in the workforce are thinking about their life's work. Education is like maybe outside of family, you know, family system and, you know, sort of social norms around family dynamics. Like that education is the number 2 input there. And so I think just practically speaking, it's an input into almost all the problems that people care about. But I also think that we are totally underestimating the damage that the current system is doing to kids. And it's very hard, I think, when you have these like giant aggregate data sets to really understand like when you talk to a parent who's, you know, maybe a low or lower middle class family, like in Miami, for example, like they view their kids' current education, like they were basically willing to make any sacrifice possible to get their kid out of their current education system. And that could be moving, saving up money to move. That could be finding an alternative school. I talked to a parent who was taking on like $12,000 a year of debt, and she was making maybe $40,000 a year in order to get their kid into a private school. And so parents are willing to make these insane sacrifices. And so on the per parent level, you see it and you're like, okay, something's like fundamentally broken. And then the aggregate data, obviously, like depending on the year or what studies released, whatever, like you can see sometimes very scary trends. But then you can also see stuff that's like, oh, maybe everything's okay. But when you go talk to these families, it's very clear that it's not okay.
Yeah. How did the system progress there, do you think, over time?
I mean, so I have a lot of theories on this, and I'm not as well studied as a lot of people, but the thing that I think is very under discussed is the incentive structure. This incentive structure that now exists in the traditional system is, if you talk to a teacher, it's basically all about downside minimization instead of upside maximization. And so, like the thing that you get in trouble for, or the thing that's the biggest deal, if you think about magnitude of impact on you as a teacher, if you have, 40% of your class is ahead, like significantly ahead academically, maybe you like are nominated for some like award that you can like put on your LinkedIn or whatever, but like it's not like you're getting some like performance-based bonus that's like gonna like change your life, or it's not like you're getting some like crazy promotion immediately. But if 40% of your class all of a sudden starts failing, and it's like failing the state test or that's a huge problem. Like either you're getting fired, or like your principal's gonna be really frustrated, or your school's funding is gonna be impacted or whatever. And so you have a situation where my articulation of this would be we are extremely lucky that most teachers happen to be altruistically motivated. Like they actually care about, the median teacher really does care about their students' progress and is willing to put in a ton of their personal time and energy and resources into making that happen. And I think if that were not the case, and we just saw the pure play incentives of the current system on display, the results would be substantially worse than they are today, because the incentives are so broken. And
like the incentives basically get it on paper. It's like, don't get it as bad as it could get in some sense.
Yeah, the incentive is like, just spend all of your energy making sure that you don't have some catastrophic situation.
Right. Exactly. Nothing breaks down, that they kind of pass and they just move forward.
Right. And we totally miss the fact that like, there's these kids that are ahead, or maybe even they're just average, and they're the way that they perceive their own progress in life, their own education, their own learning is being permanently altered by like feeling like there's something they're hitting, some friction they're hitting, and being able to move faster. And we sort of, no one would articulate this way, but we seem to have essentially accepted that as collateral damage in the effort of trying to bring up the floor for everyone. And I don't think we're having an honest conversation about what the impacts of that are.
Yeah.
And I think this is where it goes by the teacher. Like, I just think we're really lucky that most teachers actually care a lot. And that's usually for these kids that are ahead or progressing or whatever, like they have teachers that care and are excited and, are intrinsically motivated to help them. And that's, probably the duct tape that's keeping a lot of the system together.
So how do you think about good incentives? What would an ideal system be for teachers that would work?
I've thought about, I think it'd be very fun to design like a sort of like a what you would assume the design would be for like a high performance organization where performance is what was incentivized financially, and layer that on top of like an existing school district's compensation, or maybe you could start with just a school, but have like a couple $1 million of bonuses that were like on the table for various things happening. And you have to be very careful, because you can then, maybe everyone starts just teaching to the test even more than they are today. There's all these problems. But if you layered in like parent satisfaction, student satisfaction, academic achievement, and some other thing around like extracurricular achievement or kids taking on interesting projects outside of their core academics or whatever, however you wanted to structure it, I'm pretty sure you would see like a pretty different behavior. And you probably wouldn't need, the average teacher, like if you wanted to give them a bonus of 10 or 20% of their salary for some of these performance metrics, it's, 10 grand or 15 grand, or depending on the district. Right. And so you're not talking about that much money. And I don't know if, there's all sorts of reasons why maybe it wouldn't work, but I would be very interested to see if you did that for 4 or 5 years, what would happen in that district.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Josh and I were talking about on the way here yesterday in the plane, one of the benefits of homeschooling is that parents have skin in the game vis-a-vis the outcome of the student, right? Like it's not quite like a venture investment, but it's better than that, deeper than that. Like you there's the buck stops with you. Yeah. You're the input. Whatever the outcome is on the other end, in some cases, like reflects back on your investment as a parent.
And that's what's interesting about that too, is like that feels like something that is that has become uniquely not a part of American culture as much as it is internationally. Like when I talk to immigrant families, they view their kids, they're willing to make almost like unbelievable sacrifices for their kids in exchange to like have because they have this sort of like very long-termist view on like their family, and they're basically willing to like bet everything on their kids.
Our family's here today.
Right. And it has to be here tomorrow. Right.
The whole family.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think homeschooling has a little bit of that, where it's like, hey, we're gonna take a huge amount of agency on ourselves to try to create this better outcome for the next generation in our family.
Yeah. So when did you start primary?
4 years ago.
4 years ago.
Yeah.
So 2019-ish?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious, how did your bet or your idea on primer change or evolve during COVID, especially when school shutdowns happened? And then it seemed like that ignited a resurgence or a new interest in school optionality, school choice.
Yeah. So we had a product. The first product we launched was this online destination for like ambitious kids to be able to connect and do real, like we called it, like earnest work together. So they could write books or work on art projects or whatever they wanted to do
That's
together.
when I first heard of Primer.
Yeah.
Right. That
And so, and the goal was basically our like original, seed demo was, hey, we're going to build this, aggregation point for kids. And then we're going to, once we get geographic density, we're going to launch micro schools, in those areas where we have geographic density. And we launched that right before COVID. That blew up as predictably as, you would think during COVID. But as we started to come out of COVID, like churn was really high. It was really hard to retain families. Ultimately, they were kind of thinking about it like an alternative to Roblox or Minecraft, like in terms of how their kids spent time after school.
Another online third space where kids could.
Exactly.
Right.
And we just raised our Series A, and it was pretty clear to me that there was this permanent shift that had happened in education in terms of, and specifically how parents viewed their children's education. And I was hearing from like parent after parent who was like, hey, COVID gave me like a crystal clear view of like what my kids' education was like. I got to know their teachers better. I got to observe these like online classes that they're doing. And I want something different for my kids. And so we made the decision coming out of that to basically accelerate micro schools and say, hey, we're going to do this now. And we're going to go all in on it rather than waiting for it to be kind of like phase 3 of Primer. And so in retrospect, we should have done that way sooner based on the response. But it was hard. It was in the moment, it felt very risky because we had this, I think, very well thought out sort of multi-year plan to get there. But it was very clear that COVID sort of created, I think, sort of a one-time shift. I think it accelerated some trends, but I think it was really like a one-time sort of step function on a lot of graphs. And so it was an opportunity for us to basically capture a lot of that and be an alternative that then could start growing along that trend.
Yeah. So why, why Primer? Why schools? You have a varied background across a bunch of different startups. Why did you capitalize on schools as an idea? What made you excited to build this?
Yeah, so I grew up. My mom was a public school teacher, and we moved to Florida. And she took me to kindergarten orientation, and she, as the story goes, she like freaked out and was like, I like can't leave you here. Like I don't want, this is basically like I think it was like an F-rated school. It was just we were in a pretty low income neighborhood. And she was actually very pro public school. She wrote a paper, I think it was like her last paper getting her teaching degree, on why we should have compulsory public education for every student in the United States. And we should ban, I can't remember if it was just homeschooling in private schools, but it might have been charter schools too. And it was like just public schools. Okay. So she was like pretty far down that train. But she's doing this school's, kind of basically we can't do this. And so I think at a time she thought she would just do this for like a year and she would homeschool me. I was the oldest, so I had 2 younger siblings. And then I don't know, they'd save up some money and like move to a better school district. But for a variety of reasons that didn't happen. And so she ended up homeschooling us for kindergarten through 8th grade for all of us. So it's like 16 years total of homeschooling. And what she really did was start a micro school. So she found like 5 other families in our neighborhood. And this was early 90s in Florida. So there was not a lot of homeschoolers. But these were other people that didn't want their kids to go to the schools that we were zoned for. And so, and she was kind of the one with teaching experience. So she catalyzed all this. And she put together this unbelievable education for us. I mean, it was probably the single most impactful thing that anyone will ever do for me was like the sacrifices that my parents made to give us that education. And at some points in this, like my dad was working multiple jobs so that she could, stay home with us. And there was just at every turn, she made things experiential. And so all these things that are, project-based learning and mastery-based progression, all these things that are like in vogue now, she was doing, 20, 30 years
without
ago.
a label, probably.
Yeah, right. Just on intuition. And so like when it was time to learn about the American Revolution, she rented a van and we drove from Florida up the coast, and she took us to, I don't know, all or a lot of the 13 colonies and, walked the path of Paul Revere Road and went and saw all these things in person. And we could have just like learned about that from a history book, but she was like, hey, this is like a really important moment in history and we're going to go spend 2 weeks and like really like immerse ourselves in this. And that's just never an experience that you could have. There's no traditional school in the world that you can go somewhere for 2 weeks and just, learn about something. And so that was kind of, I remember when we were learning about the respiratory system, she like convinced a butcher to give her the lungs of a cow and like brought them home in a cooler one day. And like we all went out in the garage and there was like cow lungs there. And she like had put a, some sort of tube down the esophagus so we could like blow up the cow lungs, and like, see how they inflated and all this stuff. And like, that was one of, whatever, probably 1,000 moments like that over the course of the 16 years that she did this. But it was an enormous amount of work. So she was doing all this from scratch. There was no infrastructure at all. And so when I went to traditional high school and then went to University of Florida, dropped out, met my wife there, moved to San Francisco, started building tech companies. And when my wife and I started having kids, I wanted them, I was like, oh, that clearly is like the best education option. I knew that we, at the time, were like, probably didn't want to homeschool solo. We wanted more of like a micro school environment. And so I assumed that this existed. I assumed someone had built some amount of infrastructure for this because it had been at that point, like 20 whatever years since my mom started doing it with me. And I just assumed that someone had built like the Stripe of, micro schools or something. And so my first plan was I'm gonna start one of these in San Francisco, and I'm gonna use whatever infrastructure exists and then start it, and we can find some other families that want to do it with us. That didn't exist, and so then my next plan was, okay, I'm gonna fund someone to do this, and so I spent, I don't know, a few months, maybe 6 months talking to founders, maybe a year, I don't know how long it was, but I was at another company at the time, and I spent a bunch of time talking to founders saying, hey, you should go build this. This is a huge opportunity. And this was pre-COVID. And I said, I'll be, your first investor and I'll help you raise money. And there's a bunch of aligned investors who could probably get involved. And every single founder I talked to was like, and I wasn't asking them to co-found with me. I was saying like, you go, start this. They unanimously was like, why would I ever do that? Like, that sounds like the worst experience in the world. Like, you got teachers unions and regulation and all this stuff. And it was such a clear picture to me of why this category of problems often go unchanged. There's all sorts of reasons why, like, once you started, it's extremely hard to succeed. But even before you started at the inception, there's this whole class, this huge class of problems where it's just, for a variety of reasons, not something that founders are willing to attack typically. And I have a bunch of theories on that. But anyways, long story short, it was clear to me that if this was going to happen, it would be something that I needed to start. And so, my wife and I had a bunch of conversations about it, and we had an acquisition offer from my previous company. And so it was kind of, the timing was all lining up. And so went all in on starting Primer, and the vision was really like, and actually today, even like, we're building product experiences that literally, like, I had a manual version of that my mom created, 25 years ago, that's now this like, digital dashboard in a student's app that's powered by GPT-4 and all this stuff. And so there's a lot of parallels even today, from that early inspiration.
That's pretty cool. I mean, it sounds like you mentioned Stripe, but for schools, I was thinking AngelList, but for kind of like fund management for micro schools. It's like, take all the admin stuff, all the bloat out of the hands of the teachers, let them focus on the outcomes, on the education. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
What do you think is the ideal education, like the ideal system? I mean, I know you're creating more of a system and making it repeatable. People can use it across all different types of subjects. But if you had just like, I have one kid and I'm going to have all the resources I can, like, how would you set that up?
Yeah, I would with unlimited resources and unlimited time, I think you would have, it would be academically, it'd be almost entirely one-on-one experiences with an expert. And so you would have, in practical terms, you'd have, PhDs from MIT or whatever, coming to your house to hang out with your kids and show them interesting projects they're working on. And it would be as much as possible oriented around real world things that are happening. So like, my 6-year-old is super interested in SpaceX. And so, my dream would be like, you have like a former SpaceX engineer that, he gets to hang out with all the time and just ask all his questions about SpaceX. And then just has this, it's like physics, all sorts of like subjects that you can open up from there. But it's all through the lens of like, he's just obsessed with SpaceX and is obsessed with outer space. And so, I think one-on-one, like interest-driven one-on-one experiences for like the core academics. And then I think one of the things that we feel strongly about at Primer is that you want kids to understand where they are academically, but it's totally fine for kids to go way ahead in one subject and still be like, if a kid is 3 grade levels ahead at ELA and on grade level at math, you don't ask them to like go faster in math. You say like, hey, can you keep going faster in ELA? That's awesome that you're like super talented at writing or whatever. And so you want to accept like large deltas in where they are academically. And then you want some amount of socialization, but I think the socialization piece is like totally overblown, especially as a criticism of homeschooling. The amount of socialization that you need for a kid to not be, I mean, the fear is that they become some sort of like isolationist, person that can't engage in relationships or something.
Asocial.
If they're playing sports and like going to church, like that's like plenty of socialization to make sure that doesn't happen. If they're playing with kids at the park, so you do need some of that. But I think that like the idea that you need to be like in a classroom with 30 other kids all day, every day to somehow check some arbitrary socialization box is totally insane. So that would be my dream. And I think of education like, so that's actually kind of like where we work backwards from at Primer, where it's like, if you could give every kid that would be amazing.
Yeah.
But you can't spend $175,000 a year on every kid's education. So how do you do it for $8,000 a year, $9,000 a year? And what are the right compromises to make to go from that to this? But one of the things that we talk about a lot internally is that the goal of education, everyone thinks of like K through 12 education. The goal is to get to college. The goal is from college is to get a job. It's like this sort of industrial.
Yep.
So your kids can do the same. And
exactly. And really, like I think about it is the goal of education is to help every kid has some amount of potential to go achieve some number of things that they're intrinsically motivated and excited about. And the goal of education is to help each kid achieve that potential. And so if you think about all the range of outcomes that a child's life could have, your job is to maximize the optionality of those range of outcomes that they can achieve once they get out of whatever your education, if it's K through 5 or K through 8 or K through 12 or whatever, and give them the best chance of, whatever the 99th percentile outcome is, give them the best chance of doing that. And one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that, especially in the tech world, there's this, sort of draw to like, okay, we need like everyone to be doing like groundbreaking, research or like founding the next, $1 billion company or whatever. And sure, like I want Primer kids to grow up and do those things too. But if a Primer kid who came from maybe like a middle-class family is like, hey, what I want to do is I want to go like start, a really great, series of body shops. And I want to like be like an awesome small business owner in my town that I grew up in. And this is what I want to do. And I want to like build a bunch of equity in these businesses. And then that's like my life dream. Like, that's amazing. Like, I want Primer to be the best place in the world to help you accomplish that and be set up to do that. And so I think for me, like we try to, as much as we can, instill in the kids, like, hey, there's actually a very wide aperture of things that you can go do with your life. And just because certain things are like high status does not mean that those are the things that you should automatically be attracted to.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So it's not going to be just a machine for Nobel Prize winners. Like, that's not.
I hope we have a few, but yeah, I think, the world needs a lot of, small business owners and
100%.
You touched on two things that Teal has talked about in the past, the problem with incrementalism, where it's like, society as a whole, certainly the education machine, doesn't allow for somebody to take off from the pack or to have one aspect of themselves get better than the rest, which is bad. The other is competition, like the problem with like the high status schools that send kids to high status universities, to send kids to high status jobs, is you're competing with a bunch of other people for a handful of small positions. Whereas this sounds like much more the holistic human approach to some of these kids might want to go be Nobel Prize winners or SpaceX 2.0 founders, but in some cases maybe they want to build an amazing cash flowing empire of HVAC.
Exactly. And like the median outcome is like,
or go teach at a primary microschool when they're old.
And like we lie to these kids because like the median outcome of doing the traditional path is like being 35 years old with $100,000 of student debt,
right? And
being feeling totally stuck in life. Like that's actually the highest probability outcome. And so if you could say, hey, you could do an apprenticeship, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade at Primer, and then you can get, someone to mentor you for the next 2 years and go to trade school, whatever it is, like, and you can be making, $150,000 a year by 27 in a small town and be like a small business owner that's making an impact on all your customers' lives and a staple of the community. Like I don't know if that's the median outcome, but even if that's the 75th percentile outcome, like those are way better odds than, chasing the same thing that everyone else is chasing. So I hope that Primer is the best engine that we can make it the best engine for, even if you do want to go to Harvard or you want to go win a Nobel Prize or whatever. But I think that if I had to choose, I would say that there's this like very underrated, spectrum that we want kids to understand is a possibility.
Yeah.
Is it always one teacher per micro school? Is that the model typically?
We have a couple teachers that are like, sort of like empire building a little bit, where they're like, they have more kids than they can teach and they want to like start growing and then have kind of a larger thing. So we will figure out some model where there's But right now it's one micro school leader and then a studio guide, just like another adult that's sort of a assistant teacher, and then up to like 25 to 28 kids depending on the school.
Gotcha. Because you could see it kind of like a parallel to ancient schools where there was like a name brand teacher, and then that's Aristotle's school becomes famous and people go to it.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, that's pretty sick. Where do you see the role of like online education in all of this? So one of the things I explored, my own background is in terms of education. My parents, similar story to yours. My mom especially, very contrarian. Looked at school and was like, I don't know exactly why, but I don't like this. So we're going to pull you guys out and you're going to be homeschooled. And we were not even in Florida. We were in Mexico City. We were, Christians, Protestant, classical, in a Catholic country, classically educated. Like the only other family that did this was ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but it was a very contrarian bet from early on. And part of what made that bet work was my mom, like your mom, a lot of work, tremendous pouring of herself into the kids. But then later on, when we got to harder subjects, pulling in the kind of blossoming online school, world. Yeah. Where do you see the online school world fitting into primer? Do you plug it in at all? Is it a separate kind of parallel venue or effort? What do you think of that?
Yeah. So this goes back to how do you if you work backwards from top. Like 99th percentile teacher, one-on-one with a student, like that's like the dream.
Yeah.
And so I definitely believe that in-person, one-on-one, face-to-face is the best. However, there's some, if you look at like as an example, if you had a 99th, clearly everyone would agree that if you have a 99th percentile virtual teacher teaching someone one-on-one, on some sort of video live class versus a 20th percentile in-person teacher, like you would take the virtual teacher.
Sure.
And so I think the challenge is figuring out what is the amount, the right diff to think about there in terms of what you'd be willing to sacrifice. What is the handicap for virtual? Mm-hmm. And so all primer micro schools are mixed age. And so there's up to 3 grade levels in a single school. And so especially kids that are coming from the traditional system that might be like a 2 or 3 grade levels behind in some cases, like you actually have a pretty wide grade range, academic grade range, not age range, represented in a micro school. And so to get those kids the support that they need, you have to be able to layer in some amount of virtual experiences. And so we take a pretty thoughtful approach to it. So there's basically a couple different ways that kids can engage. There's one-on-one, sort of like very immersive, intense remedial support that some kids get, and small group support. And so this would be like, okay, a kid is in 4th grade and they're really still struggling with like foundational phonics. They're going to go into a remedial experience with other kids that also need that remedial support. That's going to be totally separate from their other ELA work, and it's going to be on top of that. So it's not like substitution; it's like on top of it. And then there's going to be, so that would be one piece. And then the second piece would be kids that are interested in some very specific topics. So they might be interested in marine biology research, or they're interested in, crafting legislation in their town for something. These are very specific things that a subject matter expert is going to be far better equipped to like guide them through than like a local teacher. And so those are the main places that we lean in. And then the micro school leaders are also equipped. And so there'll be things, so for kindergarten through 2nd grade, there's basically no digital learning experiences at all. By the time you get to 6th through 8th, there's much more. And so that could be things like learning apps. It could be, depends on what the kid needs. And then the micro school leaders are also engaging with like in-person stuff. So for example, like for ELA, kids are almost always reading physical books and then discussing those as a group in person. They're not doing that on Zoom. And so it really depends on the subject and the micro school, but we try to be thoughtful about it. And it really comes down to that diff of like, okay, if we can get a 90th percentile remedial phonics, teacher for 4th graders that are behind, like that is going to be better for them 100% of the time than their micro school leader trying to like intervene and help them. Mm-hmm. And so we really just think about those trade-offs and try to make the right call.
That's cool. And for extracurriculars, do you just lean on the parents to come up with sports and that kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, for sports, but like, so kids at primer, most kids have like 2 hours a day in the afternoon where they can go deep on whatever they're excited about. So we call them primer pursuits. And so that could be starting a company, launching a podcast, writing a book, doing research, whatever. And so for those experiences actually often map to what parents would perceive to be like high quality extracurriculars. It's just part of the school day and it's tied to their interests and they're actually accomplishing academic goals. So like in Florida, you have to learn, there's like social studies, classes and requirements that you have to learn. We don't like plop our kids down and it's like, hey, you have to learn this about social studies. We're like, hey, here's a project you're excited about. Let's figure out how to incorporate the milestones that you need for social studies into this project. And so often parents will articulate to us like, oh, I was going to sign my kid up for like these 5 things, but actually like primar's already giving them that. So sports is the only thing we don't do. But in most states you can play sports at other schools without you can actually do it like by right as a parent, as long as your kid can make the team. And so most of our kids just play sports at the schools.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is there a way you can construct the economics in such a way that you can beat out all these other legacy institutions? Like traditionally, like we were talking about earlier, if you had all the time and all the money in the world, yes, you can do this incredible education. But have you thought about how to set things up in such a way where the teachers are paid well and you get this high quality education, but not at an exorbitant cost?
Yeah, that is the goal of primer, is to figure out how do you build. The only way to make this work and be an actual mainstream, true competitor substitute for the traditional system is if it works for a middle class family making $75K a year. And the only way to do that is to decrease OpEx and CapEx enough where the marginal cost of each new student seat is low enough, and the ongoing operating cost of that seat is low enough to where either directly or like with other scholarships and things that are available, a family can afford to do that on $100 or $200 a month, maybe $300 a month. And that's part of why I'm so obsessed with microschools is that it's an asset light model. You can operate in existing real estate. You can operate in libraries, community centers, churches, synagogues. Like there's all sorts of underutilized real estate from 8 to 3 on Monday through Friday that is already set up well for kids to be in. And so you have very, very little cost from a real estate perspective, which is usually the big lift. And then most importantly, you have very little upfront time friction to accessing that space. Like if a traditional school, if you want to build a school in Miami, it's probably a 7-year project from like inception, from start to like actually students are in there, between zoning and entitlements and all the things you got to do, then building the actual facility, inspections and all that. And so the ability to add 30, 60, 90 new seats, partnering with a synagogue or a church or a library that has 3 rooms that you can use to launch microschools in, and doing that in 6 weeks or 8 weeks versus a 7-year process to get 500 seats live, you can see how it's superior. And so that's my view, is that microschools are the structural innovation that allow you to get to a point where you can deliver on a per student basis. You can deliver an education, a really, really good education for $8,000 or $9,000 a year, which in most states is half or less than what the traditional system is.
Okay. So on CapEx side, you don't build buildings fresh. You just use what's already there, but is not being used. And then ops, just not having a ton of administration.
Yeah, I mean, the administration is code. I mean, we don't, like, if you're a microschool leader, like almost everything that would have been done by the administrative team at your school is done with code now. There's a few exceptions of centralized things that we do from like HQ to then support the microschools. But the primer OS is almost like Tesla autopilot for a school. That's really like what we're driving towards.
Have you thought about yet pushing that past K through 12 into the higher ed space?
We haven't. I've thought about it in passing, but we have no like firm plans. Yeah, that's a whole different beast. Maybe someday.
Code replacing the bureaucrats is something that I love. Where do you see AI fitting into this? Like you mentioned GPT-4 earlier.
Yeah, I'm honestly pretty underwhelmed with. So going back to the ideal, you can imagine a world where an LLM powered tutor, like an AI tutor, could provide 80% of the value eventually that like a expert talking to a kid one-on-one could provide. But I think the architecture of these models right now is transformer. Like I think it's they struggle. Math is the subject that is the most ripe for a sort of AI powered tutor getting to 80 or 90% as good as a teacher, because it's for most students, it's linear progression. There's building blocks that you have to understand, and almost every student, maybe 75% of students are going to learn things in the same order, and their brains are going to build in the same way. And so it would be possible to say, hey, here's the way that students learn these things, double back if they're not learning it, very basic stuff that a teacher would do, but then you could train them well to do. But the problem is that all the models right now suck at math, and they just because of the way the architecture of the model. And so I'm pretty underwhelmed right now with what exists, but I do, I think clearly, like in the next 12 to 36 months, there'll be a solution that works for some portion of that at scale. So right now, what we use AI for mostly is around personalization for students, and then around saving teachers time. And so finding ways to take something that a teacher would have done manually, and either accomplishing it for them entirely or mostly through some automated process. And so either it saves it, takes something that took an hour to 0 minutes, or if something took an hour to 8 minutes or something. But I think one of the things that's really exciting is that my view is that most of the AI tutor, AI and education stuff is going to become commoditized, because the underlying models are what's going to do 99% of the lifting. And so you're going to have hundreds of these companies that are going to start these AI tutors and different things. And so the space that in my opinion, the where the enterprise value will be created is not in being the 101st AI tutoring company. It's being the people that operate thousands or tens of thousands of schools that then you can layer in these tools in and massively decrease your OpEx and your COGS. And so that's what I'm excited about, is we have all these amazing, very smart people, Sam Altman's an investor in Primer, that are building these amazing things that then we're going to get to take that technology and put it into the schools and increase, student outcomes, improve student outcomes and family experience, but then also decrease COGS and operating costs, which then allows us to get to the place where we really can deliver this in a way that's accessible to every family.
That's awesome. Do teachers find that? So I assume their administrative time, decreases drastically.
Yep.
Maybe not down to almost zero in some cases when using Primer. What about their earnings? Is it also just better financially for the teacher?
Yeah, they make on average about 25% more than they would make in the equivalent district salary. So like we look at basically whenever we launch a school, we look at the pay scale for based on experience. All these are all pre-negotiated things in every public school district. And then we typically try to, it's a combination of salary and effectively like revenue share on the school. And we try to make sure they're making about 25% more minimum than they were.
Yeah.
But they can stack, they get incentives for referring students and doing summer programming and after school and all these things. And so you can actually make a lot of money doing this. And I think that's where kind of the entrepreneurial side of it is really exciting, where you can give teachers a way to really like kind of start their own small organization that they can run and be an entrepreneur, which resonates with a lot of teachers, and they happen to be usually pretty good at it.
That's cool. You mentioned some of the entrepreneurial side. A lot of the Primer, as an outsider, reflects in a really good way the best ethos of Silicon Valley, which is that sort of entrepreneurial, like, how do we make this better? Whereas like we mentioned earlier, the traditional school model, either K through 12 and then higher ed, is much more sort of old school. You go to school A so you can get to B to C to D, etc. How much do you've been in Silicon Valley for a long time, both building and in companies, investing in companies. How much of that world are you trying to infuse in how you shape the kids' experience at Primer? Are you doing that sort of intentionally? How do you think of that?
Yeah, I would say we are trying to be pretty thoughtful about it. I think there's something aspirational and exciting about the idea of attending a school and being a part of a school that's trying to be innovative and push, the ball forward. But I also think there's something, we aspire to be pretty Lindy what we're doing is the anomaly was like the last 70 years of education. Like, we're not the anomaly. The anomaly was the last 70 years. Like, for all of human history, this is how education has worked. You had, a wise, talented person teaching a small group of children. And so I think from a feel perspective, we certainly don't lean into or want to lean into too aggressively on feeling like it's like this Silicon Valley company that's like trying to fix education, and much more about, hey, we're trying to empower great teachers to launch schools to serve their communities, and that's what we're obsessed with. That's the problem that we're obsessed with, and we think that is the recipe to fixing K-12 education in the U.S. But we're doing it through empowering these teachers who are the superheroes and the people that are actually launching and operating the microschools. But I do think it's attractive to people to feel like there's this organization behind it that is building these tools and building really good product experiences. Like parents will log into the Primer dashboard and they'll be like, I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm thinking. Like as a parent, like I could come to Primer. My kids are still really young, but come to Primer and be like, this was not built by bureaucrats.
Exactly. Yeah. So they can like text. They have like a text customer support line. They can text us whenever they want. They get responses like almost 24/7. They can call us whenever they want. They can text their Microschool leader whenever they want. They like have this dashboard that gives them a live view of how their students progressing in every subject academically, how they're tracking against their goals, what their grade level is, like grade level equivalency is, books they're reading, like all that stuff. And so from that perspective, absolutely, it does feel like completely different from a parent perspective. But we really want all that to be in service of the Microschool leader and in service of what they're creating, versus feeling like it's like Primer top down.
Well, are there particular states where you found that there's an appetite for this over other particular states?
We're only in Phoenix and Florida, in Arizona and Florida right now.
Is that due to just like learning a playbook of the state and like running it over and over?
Yeah, learning a playbook of the state. Ian Bravo, who joined our team really early on as kind of like the head of schools for Microschools, he was based in Miami and he launched a school in Miami with Kip. And so that was why Miami was kind of the starting point. There's also, I think, given the population influx, there was a lot of overcrowded schools and parents that were looking for alternatives because of that. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of demand side reasons why that wasn't a good idea. But we have parents probably from every state now, at least 20 or 30 of them, that have reached out and said, hey, we want to start a Primer school in Austin or Utah or wherever. And we have a group of families around, like, can we, have a Primer school? And so we haven't figured out a good way to productize that motion yet. But I want to figure it out because that's a huge unlock when you can tell a parent, like, cool, here you go. Like, go run it. We don't need to really be involved. Like, you can go take the stack and go run it. But right now it's all like, it's very sort of thoughtful expansion from our perspective.
Yeah. Are there any states where you think it's going to be real tough to ever have a primary school right now, given current landscape of regulations? Or is it? Yeah,
it really comes down to how hard is it to launch a new private school is really the question.
That's the question.
And it's actually mostly, the interesting thing about this is everyone assumes that it's Department of Education regulation that makes this hard. And that is true on the margins in some states, but it's almost always local land use. That is the reason why it's hard to start alternative
regulations around like use of buildings and such.
Yeah. So like in the city of Miami, I'm not going to get the number precisely right, but the Miami metro area is, 6 million people or something. And I think there's 176 parcels of land in the city of Miami that can be used, that are zoned and can be used by right as a school, a K through 12 education institution. And this is a metro area of millions of people. And all of those are in use, obviously. And so if you want to launch a new school of any kind, it can be a school for 5 kids or 5,000 kids, you have to find a building that you can operate in that is zoned for education. And if not, which you can't, then the only alternative is to go through this very subjective bureaucratic process to get, depending on the jurisdiction, either certificate of occupancy or certificates of use or conditional, it's all these different terms for it. And that process is where, basically like innovation goes to die. It's a process where there's multiple steps where other people can step in and slow it down and add friction or shut it down entirely. And so what I'm really passionate about, what we've spent a lot of time working on, we've actually passed 2 different pieces of legislation in different states now that we've written, we've authored and passed to reform that at the land use level. And so that's actually the place that I feel like is most underrated as far as what's creating friction. The last 4 years, on average, there's only been 38 new schools, non-public schools started in the state of Florida per year. 38 in the entire state, which I think if you asked anyone that, they would guess, at least an order of magnitude higher.
Sure. I would guess that, yeah.
Yeah. And it's almost entirely because of local land use. It's actually not the Department of Education that's the problem. And so that's the area that we're pushing on, and that and the thing that makes me sad about it is like if you were a highly motivated teacher and you didn't have primer or parent and you wanted to start a school, it is basically impossible in a lot of these states to go do that. Now we've gotten really good at this playbook, and we built this engine and we figured out how to get it done, which is great for us because that's our value prop to teachers. But for the sake of humanity and the future of the US, it should be way easier for people who want to comply. And this is, again, these are people that are complying with all the Department of Education regulations. So they're not trying to do anything that's
crazy,
out of bounds from that perspective. But it's actually not the Department of Education regulation, it's the local land use. And so that's the thing that we're leaning on, and we hope to see some significant reform in.
Yeah, bureaucracy is the mind killer. It's
more than just a mind killer.
Yeah. Yeah. What was I going to say? So piece of legislation. This veers, into sort of startups, friends of ours who are also building companies that border. Not the entire business of the product isn't political, but that ends up just by virtue of all the insane bureaucracy that we live in, has to kind of run into the bureaucrats pretty quickly. Fight regulators. Augustus, founder of Rainmaker, he was just testifying in the Tennessee legislature, trying to get them to not pass a climate alarmist bill. And he's just building a company, but all of a sudden he has to be in front of the Tennessee legislature. How do you think about that?
I think there's defensive versus offensive, and if you have to choose, you always want to be on the offensive. And so everything we've done has been, we're trying to go push for reforms that we think are right. They're helpful for primary, but they're also just right ideologically and for the world. And so we've been lucky to not be on the defensive from that perspective. But one of the things that I believe that I think is that this is a perfect example of is the world. I think the world is far more malleable than people think, and you can accept this idea that like the world is just passing you by and there's this set of predefined constraints and you just have to figure out how to operate within the constraints, or you can realize that actually everything about the world, like everything about those constraints, was created by other people. Those constraints aren't like the laws of physics, and for some companies they are, but for most of them they're not the laws of physics. It's just like these other things that were invented by other people, and you can actually go change those things. And so the two times that we've changed state law, both times people have come to us and like, wow, like that's amazing. Like I've been dealing with this problem for like 6 years, and that's incredible. Like, thank you so much for doing it. And it's like, these problems weren't not known. Like, these were known to be problems. It was known to be bad governance. It was known to be, creating all this friction unnecessarily, but no one had actually just said, okay, if we're going to go, like, let's just do it. Let's just pass the law and change it. And it turns out it's like not that hard. It's not that expensive. It's not that difficult to do it. And so that's something I believe the world is far more malleable than we give it credit for. And this was one instantiation of that.
That's cool. So what's next for Primer?
Lots of new microschools.
Okay.
So we're going to be launching a bunch of new microschools in August, expanding throughout Florida and Arizona. And then next year we'll be announcing at least one new state. We have several states and local governments that are cities and municipalities that are basically coming to us saying like, hey, can you come launch Primer in this state or this city or this county? And so that's obviously a wonderful expansion motion to have people wanting to bring you there versus proactively going. And so we'll be announcing those soon. But for now, we're focused on expansion in Florida and Arizona.
Awesome. Cool. Well, for parents and or teachers who are interested in actually doing something with Primer, what should they do? Where should they go?
Primer.com. And we'd love to hear from you.
Sweet. Awesome. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the New Founding Podcast. New Founding has become a rallying point for founders and investors who are taking serious bets in the face of a stagnant business culture. Our venture fund backs founders building dynamic companies, powered by American ideals and a positive national vision. These are the kinds of founders that embody the optimism and competence of the people who come on this podcast. If you're interested in investing in our fund, check out newfounding.com/venture fund and follow the link to apply.